covered an enormous amount of territory, literally and substantively. And as I mentioned, we're not doing the cards this year. We're doing the 2 microphones. And so if you have any questions, I would ask you to move to the microphone. And, excuse me, in deference to the size of the audience, could you please try to make your questions questions and less and equal time. And I'm having trouble seeing, so yes, there you are. There is something there waving its arms.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. And my question is for Suzanne Maloney. It picks up on the importance of Mr. Derejian's stress on the need for engagement with adversaries. I hear voices of people who have considerable expertise on Iran, including lots of Iranian Americans, saying that we should not award the current authoritarian and repressive government in Iran with engagement with Iraq or engagement with the United States. Would you comment on this?
I understand and sympathize with that critique, but I don't agree with it, simply because I don't think we have the luxury of choosing our adversaries. Those of us who were always supporters of engagement have made the argument that this regime can behave in a pragmatic fashion and pursue its own interests in terms of foreign policy, and that obviously Khamenei has, at various points in Islamic Republic history, taken decisions that appear to counter the basic ideology of the regime time and time again. I think that still holds true. I do believe that the events of last year called the engagement paradigm into question in the sense that it deepened the mistrust that any negotiating partner would have to feel in dealing with the Islamic Republic. This is a regime that could not treat its population broadly in a civilized fashion. And so I think that it was appropriate that there was, in effect, a pause in the engagement, pursuit of engagement. But I do think that one has to approach the negotiating front with priority on the issue at stake, which is the nuclear program, and to ignore that, to push it off simply because of the reprehensible quality of many of the Iranian negotiating partners, is to leave us to even worse solutions ultimately down the line.
And Ambassador Mack, I did recognize you once I got the glare out of my eyes.
Thank you. I had a question for, primarily for Ambassador Derejian. There's a bunch of states next to the Middle East who are allies of America called the European Union. And I wondered what your view was of what their contribution should be and how America during the next 2 years could persuade them to do it.
Well, I think the Europeans have acted very constructively, especially in the Israeli-Palestinian context. And more so, the Europeans don't like to hear this, but with economic development aid and assistance and technical aid and political support for the negotiations when they were ongoing. So I think they can continue to play an important role. But let me be candid here. I think at the end of the day, it's really going to be the United States that has to be the major interlocutor between Israel and the Palestinians.
Yes, please.
Another question.
And by the way, between Israel and Syria.
Another question about Iran. It's a question about, is there a clear-cut Obama administration policy with regards to Iran becoming nuclear? In other words, is it that we will do everything short of war with the phrase, all options are on the table, but really we mean we wouldn't go to war? You talked about positive momentum, but you also threw in that Iran is likely to renege or renegotiate any deals that it makes. So if they are continuing to develop this, is the United States making it clear, or is it clear for the U.S. administration that the end result could be a nuclear Iran?
Well, I in no way speak for the administration, so I'm parsing rhetoric the same as anyone else here. The administration has never said that it takes the military option off the table, and I don't think that any U.S. administration can or will make such a statement. It does seem to me that both the Bush and the Obama administrations have invested in diplomacy and invested in trying to find a way out, and I think that while one has to always look toward the long term, and there are elements of the U.S. government that do plan for the long term and worst case scenarios, there is still a viable prospect of trying to head off an Iranian nuclear weapons capability. And as long as that prospect exists, that should be the focus of our efforts. It's not to say that it's an easy one, but that inevitably has to be the focus of U.S. diplomacy.
Would any of the rest of you like to comment on this issue, since it is such a large one?
I'm sorry?
So would any of the rest of you like to comment on the question? David?
I'll just say, in terms of connecting the dots about Iran, it's clear that its support for the spoilers, like Hamas and Hezbollah, have made the peace process that much harder. And we could engage in speculation and say, well, if they didn't have that capability, the moderates like Abbas and the like would be less fearful of the spoilers. The spoilers feel they kind of have the wind at their backs by having Iranian support. So while the nuclear issue is key and it might be symbolic, there is also ongoing economic assistance. When I sat with President Abbas, he told me Iran gave Hamas $500 million a year. Now, whether the figure is accurate, I don't know, but that's what he says. So they're posing a challenge for the United States on the nuclear issue, and they're posing a challenge by their support for these proxy groups. And as Ed pointed out, they give 40,000 rockets. A lot of those 40,000 rockets to Hezbollah are coming from Iran. Some are coming from Syria. And some are Iranian rockets coming via Syria to Hezbollah.
Question for Joost Hilderman on the idea of preventing conflict, and it regards Sudan. In Sudan, what factors do you think could help prevent the eruption of a new conflict there in 2011?
Sudan?
Sudan.
Oh, I'm afraid you're talking to the wrong person.
Oh, ICG North Africa doesn't.
Yeah, no, my organization does cover
Sudan?
it, but that doesn't mean every single employee of ICG covers every single country. I'm afraid Sudan is not my area of expertise. I would say something really stupid if I answered your question.
That's very flattering to this panel, but I think it may be a bit beyond our purview this morning. Yes.
The discussion on Israeli-Palestinian peace so far has not directly addressed the split in the Palestinian polity or the cultural, economic, geographic split between the West Bank and Gaza. Do we have a realistic chance to achieve a two-state solution while those splits persist? And what are the range of policy options that we can and should consider to address it?
Well, it's a very good question, a very legitimate question, and I think here you get into some real issues. If you quietly speak to the senior reaches of the Palestinian Authority, they are not encouraging any sort of a dialogue with Hamas. They don't believe it'll work, and they believe that it'll just cut the legs out from under them, because if you could, take Hamas's views and be a legitimate interlocutor, they would look like quislings. That's their view. The second element here is, and I'm, saying what the Palestinians are saying to me is, if we in Washington think that it's only about power for Hamas and that you could just create all sorts of paradigms that, in fact, that they have these ideological attachments with the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's very real. I think we have been taking our cues. People think we take our cues from the Israelis, but I think we take our cues more from the Palestinian Authority on this. And I think that right now our approach should be a humanitarian one at this point. We should always have the arm outstretched if Hamas wants to do as the quartet says, and those are the three conditions that the quartet puts forward. They're not American conditions, Israeli conditions. It's the U.S., the European Union, Russia, and the UN on this. And I think that, hold out the hopes. I think the Israelis used to say, well, as long as they're divided, then there's no use talking to them, and until Hamas rejoins the fold, not talking to the Palestinian Authority. That is certainly, they've come off that, and I think that it's crucial. I think there's, I think Ed Jaredji and I see it very similarly. There's an urgency right now to really move forward on the Palestinian track, and I don't think it should be held hostage to the Gaza situation. But I think we have to make sure on a humanitarian level all is done, and we have to hold out the prospects that they could join in the future. But right now, let's not hold things up.
Ed, do you want to add to that?
No, if I could put a plug into something we did at the Baker Institute, we did a report, took 2 years to write. It's called the Getting to the Territorial Endgame of an Israeli-Palestinian Peace Settlement, and the only reason I'm referencing it is because we had credible Palestinians, credible Israelis. We did a track 2 exercise, and the end game of that exercise was that in attacking, as George Mitchell has been doing, the territorial component of peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, it is doable. It is doable. We confronted all the major issues on the settlements, exchange of territory, common criteria, and we got the Israelis and the Palestinians to a point where there was a compromise solution on territorial swaps and exchange of territory between 3.4 and 4.4%, which could accommodate most of the Israeli settlement blocks, et cetera. We briefed Mitchell and the Obama team. We briefed Netanyahu's national security team and Abu Mazen personally. The only point I'm making is that it can be done despite all the obstacles.
But just a quick follow-up. I mean,
we're trying to leave it to one question. I'm really sorry we just have such a large audience and so many issues. Please.